What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Inside the Lines. Week 2 of the 2024 NFL season is in the books, and we're kind of going to go over everything that happened and kind of take a look at some of the more interesting storylines that emerged coming out of week 2 going into week 3. So without further ado, let's get into it. So before we dive into what actually happened in week 2, you remember last week I said something about holding myself accountable with the picks I made, specifically as it pertains to week 2, with the obvious exception of the Buffalo-Miami game, as I was not able to pick that game before it actually happened. So as you can see right here, these are all the picks that I made last week. I'm going to go through each game one by one and kind of see what I got wrong, what I got right, and kind of focus on the more interesting storylines from specific games that happened this past week. So we'll start things off with Baltimore. The Ravens hosted the Las Vegas Raiders in a tight contest that came down to the final seconds, in which the Ravens came up short by a score of 26-23. The Ravens dropped to 0-2, and Gardner Minshew scored 13 points unanswered in the fourth quarter, including a game-winning field goal from Daniel Carlson. Lamar Jackson finished with 21 of 34, 247 passing yards, 45 rushing yards on 5 attempts, 81 passer rating, and a touchdown and a pick. This game was a little bit of a shock to me. Obviously, that red X in the corner, in the top corner, there denotes that I picked incorrectly. The Ravens, I fully expected to win this game, because at the end of the day, I felt like they were the better team, right? I felt like when it comes down to it, when you have a guy like Lamar Jackson, Zay Flowers, and Derrick Henry, there's a certain level of expectation in addition to how well they played the Chiefs in the opener. So I was definitely surprised to see them drop this one and drop to 0-2, and we'll address more of whether or not we should be concerned or shouldn't be concerned later, as that's one of the storylines I want to key in on going forward. So now we move on to a game that I actually predicted correctly, right? You can tell by that green check mark I have in the top right corner, right? I predicted that the Chargers would go into Carolina and take one, and that they did, right? The Chargers took this one by a score of 26-3. J.K. Dobbins once again on the ground, 17 attempts, rushed for over 130 yards once again, along with a touchdown. Meanwhile, Bryce Young and co look hapless, right? Bryce Young, 18 for 26 for 84 passing yards. Just not what you want to see at all. I mean, that's a stat line that indicates that he's not doing a good job of trying to push the ball downfield at all. How do you throw the ball 26 times and only account for 84 passing yards? So, I mean, it looks like he's just throwing balls to the line of scrimmage or checkdowns that aren't primarily doing anything to push the ball down the field or move the ball much at all. And it also kind of denotes a lack of confidence, right? A lack of trust in yourself to actually make decisions of pushing the ball downfield, and probably contributed to the decision of him getting benched. Moving on to the Saints, going to Jerry World to play against the Dallas Cowboys, and the Saints dealt with Dallas. A final score of 44-19. Derek Carr, who was 11 for 16 for 243 passing yards, a 125 passer rating, 2 touchdowns, and a pick, was the second best overall quarterback in terms of offensive grade, according to Pro Football Focus. And not just him, he didn't just have a good day. Alvin Kamara had a solid day himself, off 20 attempts, 115 yards, 3 touchdowns. Rashid Shaheed with 4 targets, 4 receptions for 96 yards. And look, one of the biggest surprises, one of the storylines I wanted to chat about here, was the New Orleans Saints and this new look offense. One of the things coming into the year I was not high on was this Saints offense, right? I didn't think that they would win more than 5 games because, yes, their defense was solid and something of their team that I trusted, but I didn't trust their ability to move the ball downfield. I didn't trust how good their offense could be this season coming into the year. But one thing that I forgot, that I overlooked, especially as it pertains to how you evaluate teams from season to season, is when they acquired a new coordinator, right? The coordinators matter in the NFL, right? Don't let anyone ever tell you different. When you take a look at what happened with the Cleveland Browns a couple of years ago, one of the worst defenses in the league the season before, they fired Joe Woods, bring in Jim Schwartz, and they have the best defense in the league a season ago. So when you take a look at how much coordinators matter, when you take a look at the impact that they carry, I completely overlooked the impact a guy like Klint Kubiak could have on this offense, right? He's completely changed the way this offense looks. Now, granted, it's only been 2 games, right? But if you take a look at this new look Saints offense led by new offensive coordinator Klint Kubiak, they've scored on 16 of the 21 possessions that they've had so far this season. They only haven't had possessions that have mounted in points on 5 possessions, right? And not just that, but when Derek Carr is on the field in this new look offense, the Saints have scored on their first 9 possessions when they played the Panthers, so 5 touchdowns and 4 field goals, and then against the Cowboys on their first 6 possessions, which were all touchdowns. This Saints offense is so high powered. It's a new look offense, and it's got guys like Derek Carr and Alvin Kamara playing out of their minds. I mean, look at Derek Carr's numbers here. 30 for 39 to 76.9 completion percentage, which is second amongst quarterbacks in the NFL. 443 yards, that's 13th amongst quarterbacks in the NFL. 5 touchdowns, that's first. An interception, and a 142.4 passer rating, which ranks first amongst quarterbacks in the NFL. He's having a spectacular year to this point, and so is Alvin Kamara. 35 attempts, 198 yards in 2 games, and 4 touchdowns. And he's got, for receiving, 3 targets, 2 receptions, and a touchdown as well. Klint Kubiak's got this offense humming, and the question will remain going forward. Can it continue? Can they persist? Good defensive teams like the Falcons, like the Chargers, like the Browns, will they continue to see the same level of success that they've seen to this point going forward? And that is something we're going to try and keep our eye on going forward in this season with this Saints team. Moving on to the Buccaneers and Lions game. Look, the Buccaneers came in, they had a solid game. They won this 20-16. Baker continuing his solid start to the year. 12 for 19, 185 passing yards, a 90.9 passer rating, a touchdown and interception, along with a rushing touchdown to go along with it. The Lions continue their sluggish start to the year. Look, this is my Super Bowl pick, right? I'm not happy with how they've started the year to this point. They've started a little sluggish, right? There was that overtime game against the Rams that, in my opinion, should never have gotten that far. And now losing this game to the Buccaneers in the fashion that they did, throwing too many interceptions, mishandling of situations, coaching-wise, whether that be clock management or even, different other aspects of situational football. I'm not happy with how they've started, but I'm not worried. I'm not concerned either. This is a team that I'm still fully confident in making the Super Bowl and winning it all. They've just gotten off to a little bit of a rough start. But even though they got off to a rough start, I got to give Aiden Hutchinson props here. 4.5 sacks and a forced fumble. Played amazing, an outstanding game defensively. The offense just needs to come along and play a little bit better. Moving on to Indianapolis and Green Bay. Look, I'll admit, right, my faith in Anthony Richardson may have been a little premature, right? I mean, to this point, he's super erratic, right? There are times where he looks really good throwing the football. He throws a beautiful ball downfield, hits his receivers right in the hands, and there are times where, his passes are a little inaccurate, right? So, a little bit of inconsistency there, and him being erratic, I just don't feel like I can trust him through the first 2 games. And that 8-9 record that I predicted for Indianapolis based on how good I thought he would look or progress going into the year may have been a tad bit optimistic. That being said, I still think the Colts are going to be a fun team to watch week after week, especially if he's still remaining at quarterback. And I look forward to seeing how he grows, how he progresses throughout the course of this season. From the Green Bay side of things, Malik Willis only throwing 14 passes. I think Matt LaFleur put on a coaching masterclass in how to win a game without your starting quarterback. With having Malik Willis only throwing those 14 passes, he was 12 of 14, had 122 passing yards, a touchdown, had 46 rushing yards on 6 attempts as well, and Josh Jacobs himself had himself a day, 32 attempts for 151 yards. So a nice win for the Packers. Moving on to the Browns and the Jaguars game. The Cleveland Browns went into Jacksonville and beat the Jaguars by a score of 18-13. Deshaun Watson, a much better showing. He was 22 of 34, 64.7% completion percentage, threw for 186 passing yards, had a 78.8 passer rating, 20 rushing yards on 5 attempts, including a rushing touchdown, had a 72.2 Pro Football Focus offense grade. And look, that ranked in the top 10. He was 10th amongst quarterbacks, and according to Pro Football Focus, had a 77 pass rating or pass grade, if you will, which ranked in the top 5 amongst quarterbacks, a much better showing than what he put on, the debacle he put on in week 1. He looked way more comfortable. He looked way more decisive. He even had a few of those Houdini plays in which he scrambled outside of the pocket, made something happen with his legs, and was able to find the open receiver downfield. Much better showing, but still not at the level that is needed for them to reach the level that I predicted that they would have going forward. They only scored 18 points in this one, and in order for them to reach the level which was the AFC Championship game and ultimately losing to Kansas City, as I predicted, that offense needs to be a lot better. They still had a number of procedural penalties from the offensive line, whether that be, false starts, whether that be holdings, whether that be illegal shifts. They still had a lot of penalties from the offensive side, and their wide receivers didn't do Watson any favors at all. A lot of drops. He had the 3rd highest drop percentage in the NFL this past week. Looking at things from the Jacksonville side, Trevor Lawrence, it was a little bit of a rough day, as he also was in the top 5. He was number 2 in drop percentages by his receivers, but I also felt like he wasn't super on target with a lot of his throws. He came on in the second half a little bit, but ultimately came up short, and the Jaguars went down to the Cleveland Browns 18-13, and they dropped to 0-2 on the year, while the Browns moved to 1-1. Moving on to San Francisco and Minnesota. Minnesota took this game by a score of 17-23. They took this game at home. They advanced to 2-0. Sam Darnold, solid showing once again, 17-26, 268 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. And Justin Jefferson had himself a day before leading with a quad injury. Justin Jefferson, 7 targets, 4 receptions, 133 yards, and a touchdown. He left, like I said, in the second half with a quad contusion, but he is day-to-day, so we'll see if he plays in the next game. The Seahawks stole one in overtime against the New England Patriots by a score of 23-20. Geno Smith, 33 for 44, 327 passing yards. His receivers had a day, if you will. DK Metcalf, 14 targets, 10 receptions, 129 yards with a touchdown. Jackson Smith and Jigba, 16 targets, 12 receptions, 117 yards. So 2 receivers with 100+ yards receiving definitely is going to help your case. The Patriots, on the other hand, dropped to 1-1. The New York Jets were victorious against the Tennessee Titans for their first win of the year. Aaron Rodgers, 18 for 30, 176 passing yards, 2 touchdowns. Will Levis, on the other hand, the turnover issues continue, right? Had an interception last week, a pick 6 in week 1 that effectively gave Chicago the lead and eventually gave them the win. And in this game had a fumble loss that kind of helped the Jets get back into the game. He also had an interception. So, they definitely need to work on some turnover issues as it pertains to Will Levis. And I imagine he hopefully addresses that going forward. But they do drop to 0-2. Meanwhile, the Jets move to 1-1. Moving on to D.C., in which the Commanders hosted the New York Giants. Daniel Jones, not too bad of a showing. Ended up throwing for 178 passing yards, had an 100 passer rating, 32 rush yards on 5 attempts, threw for 2 touchdowns, and ranked 11th amongst quarterbacks in terms of Pro Football Focus offensive grades. Meanwhile, Jaden Daniels had 23 for 29, 226 passing yards, 99.1 passer rating. Look, the Giants, they scored 2 touchdowns and still weren't able to win, while the Commanders scored on all field goals, 7 field goals, and were able to take this one. So not a good sign from New York as they dropped to 0-2 and the Commanders moved to 1-1. Moving on to the Cardinals hosting the Los Angeles Rams. It is just one of those seasons for the Los Angeles Rams as they lost Cooper Kupp in this one. Stafford did what he could, 19 for 27, 216 passing yards, but ultimately was overshadowed by the historic day Kyler Murray had. Kyler Murray, 17-21, 266 passing yards, a 158.3, a perfect passer rating. Meanwhile, Marvin Harrison Jr. had 4 receptions, and 132 yards in the first half alone. He finished with 8 targets, 4 receptions, 130 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a Cardinals win by the score of 41-10. They moved to 1-1 on the year. The Cincinnati Bengals went to Arrowhead. Joe Burrow had a key fumble in this one that gave Kansas City the lead. The Bengals were then able to kick a field goal to retake the lead, but a pass interference call helped put the Chiefs in a position to kick a game-winning field goal. made by Harrison Butker that gave them the win by a score of 25-26. Not a great Patrick Mahomes game. He was only 18 for 25 for 151 passing yards, had 2 touchdowns, 2 picks. Not his greatest day offensively. Meanwhile, Joe Burrow, 23 of 36, 258 passing yards. Like I said, that fumble loss, but had 2 touchdowns. Bengals dropped to 0-2, and the Chiefs moved to 2-0, right? So, the Bengals and the Ravens both 0-2. We're going to address that here a little bit later. Moving on to the Steelers going to Mile High and taking one against the Denver Broncos. They won by a score of 13-6. Justin Fields, 13 for 20, 117 passing yard, a touchdown. They were able to take this one in Denver. The Houston Texans played host to the Chicago Bears. Another low-scoring affair. C.J. Stroud had himself a solid day, 23 of 36, 260 passing yards, 2 touchdowns. Caleb Williams continues to pile up the sack yards. One of the things that I was concerned about for the Chicago Bears coming in was that offensive line, but I also think some of the sacks are on Caleb trying to extend plays, right? Trying to do what he did in college and not having that realization yet that guys in the NFL are just as athletic as he is, and he's playing his way into a lot of these sacks that loses them big yardage. So definitely want to see him improve going forward. And then last but not least, the Philadelphia Eagles played host to the Atlanta Falcons in a very close game that came down to the last second. Kirk Cousins and co. led a game-winning drive down the field after Saquon Barkley and the Eagles said Saquon had dropped a pass on a crucial 3rd down that would have kept the clock going and gave the Eagles an opportunity to convert a 1st down and let them run down the clock. Instead, he dropped the pass, and the Falcons drove down the field, scored a touchdown, and Hurts threw a game-sealing interception. So that wraps up week 2. In terms of the predictions, right? I mean, I did all right. It was 9-6, right? I predicted 9 games correctly in terms of the 15 that were left outside of that Miami-Buffalo game, right? And, not too bad. Hopefully we can get that record up coming into next week. But now focusing on a storyline I wanted to kind of touch on before we get out of here, right? Taking a look at the AFC North. Right, take a looking at the Steelers who are 2-0, the Browns are 1-1, but these 2 last place teams that are both 0-2 and 0-2 specifically in the conference. Should we be more concerned about Baltimore? Or should we be more concerned about Cincinnati? Well, I'm going to give an actual answer, but I'm also going to give an easy answer, which is both, right? As far as Cincinnati is concerned, here are the reasons to be concerned for Cincinnati, right? Zach Taylor. In the 2 games that they've played in the AFC, they have yet to play any division games. That concerns me because in the division, Zach Taylor's overall record within the AFC North through the course of his 5-year, coming in 6-year career is 9-20 versus his AFC North rivals. That's concerning because they have 6 games against the AFC North coming up that they haven't even played in yet. And then another thing to be concerned with is the fact that they continue to get off to these horrendous starts, right? 1-11 in the first 2 weeks in each season under Zach Taylor. That is unacceptable. He's got to figure it out. I understand that sometimes it's because Burrow is hurt in the offseason coming into the regular season. He hasn't always been healthy. That offense always hasn't been healthy. But in addition to the contract disputes that have happened with Jamar Chase and what's going on with T. Higgins, I have some level of concern in addition to the fact that they're 26th in the NFL in rushing yards allowed to the first 2 games, in addition to them being 20th in completion percentage allowed to the first 2 games. So their defense isn't even, although the pass rush is there with a guy like Trey Hendrickson, their run defense isn't as good as it nearly needs to be, and neither is their passing defense. So I have concerns about them. As far as Baltimore is concerned, coming into the year, I was always concerned about all the things that they had lost on both sides of the ball coming into the year. Right? I mean, look at that long list of notable roster departures this past offseason, ranging from Morgan Moses to Rock Yassin to Kevin Zeitler and Patrick Queen to Geno Stone, right? And it's had an effect on how they've looked so far this season. If you want to look at their defense from 2023, look at how they ranked in defense specifically as it pertains to first downs. They were 6th in first downs allowed. They were 6th in passing yards allowed per game, 23rd in pressure percentage, 5th in completion percentage allowed, 14th in rushing yards allowed per game, and 3rd in scoring percentage, right? Juxtapose that to how they look this season, 21st in first down. So where they ranked 6th They're now 21st in first downs allowed. They're last in passing yards allowed per game, right? They're they're 30th in completion percentage allowed. They're 6th in pressure percentage, so they did get better in pressure percentage and rushing yards allowed per game, but 25th in scoring percentage. When you let a quarterback like Gardner Minshew, who isn't a superstar quarterback by any means, light you up for 13 points in one quarter, there's cause for concern. And what's even more concerning is their schedule, right? So both these teams, I put up both their schedules to kind of take a look at how it kind of shakes out going forward over the next 5 weeks or so. Look, they've got Dallas this coming week. They've got Buffalo the week after that. They've got Cincinnati, then the Commanders. Then they have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers going to Tampa Bay and Cleveland. So out of all these 5 teams or 6 teams that they're playing, right, 5 finished with above 500 records last season. That's cause for concern, right? It's going to be very tough for them to navigate the schedule, considering that 2 of these games are also divisional games. Now, juxtapose that to Cincinnati, who has a lighter schedule, specifically as it pertains to the fact that they're playing a last place schedule, finishing last place in the division a season ago. They've got the Commanders. I think that's winnable. They've got the Panthers, definitely winnable. They do have Baltimore. They've struggled against divisional opponents. Now, it is at home, but they have struggled against divisional opponents. They have the Giants, another winnable game. They have going to Cleveland. Now, Joe Burrow and co have struggled in Cleveland specifically. I don't know if Joe Burrow's actually ever won in Cleveland, if I'm not mistaken. So, that's a tough schedule there. And then they play versus Philadelphia. So I definitely lean Cincinnati as a team you should be less concerned about because their schedule is a lot more favorable. They do play 2 division games over the course of the next 6 games, but at the end of the day, I like their chances against a Washington Commanders, against a Carolina Panthers, against a New York Giants, and maybe even a Philadelphia Eagles, more so than I like Baltimore's chances against Dallas, Buffalo, Cincinnati. And remember, that game's in Cincinnati, so even though I don't have faith in Cincinnati's divisional acumen in terms of how they've played against their divisional opponents, it is a home game in Cincinnati, and Baltimore hasn't had a good rapport these first 2 games in the season in terms of actual pass coverage defense. And Cincinnati's receiver core is legit, right? So I have concerns about how they can look against all these teams. And then there's Cleveland there and Tampa Bay as well, right? Cleveland is a tough divisional opponent with a very good defense, right? So I like Cincinnati's chances more. I'm less concerned about Cincinnati because of how much more favorable the schedule is. But I mean, both teams should be concerned, right? Because they haven't even played games in their division, and their division is one of the toughest, if not the toughest in football. So we'll see what happens going forward. But that's going to do it for this edition of Inside the Lines. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Leave a like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. But until next time, we hope you keep it inside the lines.